Welcome to Small Business Saturday.
Welcome to Small Business Saturdays video series with your host and my husband.
And my dad, Aaron Montgomery.
Join the conversation.
Let's talk some business.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Small Business Saturdays. My name is Aaron Montgomery, and you can find me at oursuccessgroup.com. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that I've really enjoyed talking about for a while. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with podcasting, and we're going to talk about what podcasting is today and stuff like that since let's see, it's been about 8 years for me, but I was also fortunate enough along those 8 years to meet a gentleman who's been in it for quite a bit longer, about 17 years. His name is Mike Wilkerson, and he's with Two Guys Talking Studio. It's a podcast network. He's got all sorts of different services that are available for people looking to do a podcast, and he's been a huge help for me. And so we're going to talk today about podcasting for business, what it can do for your business in our COVID world, so to speak, if that's what we're calling it these days. The world we live in today seems like everybody has a podcast, which is totally fine. There's an abundance mentality. There's an audience for everybody. But as we'll talk with Mike, it's not kind of the you build it and they will come. It's definitely there's some things you need to know. And so we're going to learn those things from Mike today, and really looking forward to that here in just a moment. Before we get into that, though, I did want to remind everybody, again, go check out oursuccessgroup.com. In, let's see, September 2nd will be when the next 5 Keys training program happens. And that training program is going to be marketing. It's a 5-week sprint, so to speak, every Wednesday for 5 weeks. We're going to talk about marketing just for our OSG members, and it's going to be fantastic. We're really excited about it because not only do we get to talk about marketing, we get to give you specific steps on specific platforms: YouTube, Instagram, Google AdWords, email, Facebook. Those are the 5 that we're going to cover. I think I got them a little out of order, but that's the training part. But you're also going to get a 12-week program template, so to speak, that will allow you to start on that very first week in October and have some ideas about what you need to be doing for the next 12 weeks that lead up into that Christmas holiday week. So, you can do it every 12 weeks, you can do it every other week, but whatever fits your business, you're going to have the tools that you need to have a successful fourth quarter coming up. So if you are not a member, please make sure that you go to oursuccessgroup.com and become a member, and we will go from there. All right, let me catch a couple people checking in this morning. Sandy, good morning. And Chuck, good morning. Todd, Tanya, Cheryl, good morning. Mo and Richard, all checking in. Thank you guys so much for being here. If you have questions for Mike, please drop in. Mike and I will talk and have a great time here. I always love talking to Mike. We could do it for hours, so we'll see how we do here today. Speaking of that, let's get him in here. Welcome into the program, Mike Wilkerson with Two Guys Talking. Mike, good morning. How are you, sir?
Hey, what's going on, Aaron? It's great to be here this morning. And hey, could you play me your theme song again? Because I just get a great dance out of it in the morning.
It is a good way to get started.
That's awesome.
It is great. And I actually had some help from a guy that happens to be right here making that happen. Yeah, you helped help record that. when I had it. That was a cool experience, by the way, Mike. I'm just going to jump in and talk about that real quick. I had an opportunity to bring my family into your studio to record an episode and put my son behind the mic. At the time, I think he was 7 or 8 years old. And boy, he loved it. He was grinning ear to ear. So thank you for fostering that for us.
You can make the sage podcaster cry the first thing and I get in this morning?
Really? That's how we roll here.
Aaron is specifically talking about a piece of podcasting that is dear to my heart that we're going to definitely get to, but it's legacy. And it's that for all of you that are listening and watching right now, there's something larger than you, believe it or not. And podcasting really does allow you to not only capture it, but then convey it for a long time, far longer than you're going to be around.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the centerpieces that I try and use, not only to to sell people on podcasting, but to help people understand that even if you're just Joe Guy, you have a perspective that is a piece of your own legacy, that the instant you're gone, it goes with you. And so you can leave a lot of that for people to listen to. My dad's a great sample. Um, there's so much benefit to something like that. And I was proud to help you and your family collect something that is an incredibly bright, shiny spot on the front end of each of your programs.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I love that. And I've got a whole bunch more gold sitting there that I need to put into use. I just haven't done that yet. So
It's the other peril of podcasting where, you came in and we ended up with a 37-second intro.
yeah,
But, we recorded a lot of really great stuff that day.
yeah,
And it's a matter of being able to somehow insert it into your program. And that's where the concept of what is a podcast really does help us spring into what we're going to be talking about today.
yeah. Well, Mike, before we get there, would you do me a favor and just, I've had an opportunity to get to know you, but I'd like my listeners to get to know you a little bit more. So, I mentioned about 17 years ago. Tell us what brought you to this whole podcasting thing.
Podcasting is something that I remember kind of doing when I was about 7. I can remember inside the Versailles apartment complex just outside of Chicago in Schaumburg, Illinois, where my buddy Dave and I would sit and we would have our own little radio program, and we would just come up with concepts and ideas. And that's when, we just had a tape recorder, and it was, nobody would ever hear it except maybe he and I. And then we would have to record over whatever we made and make the new one.
Yeah.
If you fast forward to 1981, which is when I was 11, the very first Two Guys Talking podcast was in the back of my best friend's dad's minivan, where we get out of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and no bones about it. That was the very first conversation I remember, where we were talking about what we saw, actors and explosions and the stunts. And, it's very strange for an 11-year-old, but it was the concepts that I always was given as a kid, was to not only know and watch what you're looking at, but to begin to appreciate what you're looking at. And that allows you to start getting curious and want to know more about the things that you're seeing at. So that's what Carlo and I did. We looked at who were the directors. We looked at the people that made the programs, the movies that we were watching, and we wanted to learn everything that we could about them. And then you start stair-stepping into podcasting, which came after a long time of lots of things that had nothing to do with podcasting. I got my degree as an educational interpreter for the deaf. I moved to St. Louis in 1992. And strangely enough, I did that for a while. And then I got into a horrible car accident where I broke my arm and my leg. And it really helped me understand, what am I going to do if I can't use my arms?
Yeah.
That allowed me to take a lot of my artistic skill to a computer scene, which back then it was very strange. Nowadays, everybody's used to sitting down at a computer and being able to do kind of whatever you want because somebody's done something. Back then, though, that was not the way it worked. 1996, 1997. I had approached a bunch of people about taking my art onto the web to see if that was an availability, and they hit me with pricing that blew my socks off. And that's when I finally realized that I not only needed to learn how to do that, but I needed to learn how to do that for other people so that I could get some of that money that was blowing people's socks off.
Yeah, exactly.
That led to me becoming a web designer. Web designer has now led into a variety of different things, including a very prolific podcasting career, but also a career in marketing automation, which, focuses on email marketing, the ability to have people click on things that you write about and leave trails to stuff that you can download, programs that you want people to listen to, all of that. So it's been this kind of really delicious burrito that I've been able to create with skill sets. And what I also love is that I'm never afraid to add more ingredients into my burrito.
Yeah. So you got a big fat burrito now, right?
It's ungainly.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, Mike, you started talking about the concept of legacy a little bit, but talk to us a little bit more about that. How does, you mentioned podcasting can do that for us. How? What's the nexus of that?
Sure. The bottom line about podcasting is, what is a podcast? And there are many definitions. There's a specific definition that refers to there being some sort of recorded media that lives on a server and is then doled out via something called an RSS feed. That's kind of the town crier for your podcast.
Yeah.
When the RSS feed is updated, it then announces to everybody that is either subscribed or the directories that get the listings from that RSS feed to let people know that there is a new program for you to go and listen to. That is a podcast.
Yeah.
Now, for me, podcasting has become a little bit more raw, because what podcasting is podcasting is captured perspective. And all of you that are listening and are viewing now or in the future or forever from now, what you have to remember is that you have your own unique perspective. Just like me, with my incredibly strange skill set, from a kid talking into a tape recorder when I was 7 to talking to my best friend forever about Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, to fast forwarding to 2005, where a friend of mine had this kind of newsy program that also features a television review segment that turns into, being a professional critique for television, feature films, and streaming media. That's the perspective that I bring to all of this, including all of the people that I've met, including all the business circles that I run in. All of that comes, and it is a specific periscope into a world that I know. And so it's my job as talent and as a podcaster to convey that. Inside of a podcast, you want to try and select a niche, a centralized focus.
Yeah.
So that you can then take that perspective in that niche and share it with other people, so that the people that are interested will be listening to a program that they're also interested in.
Yeah.
But I think everybody will join me in saying that when you do listen to a podcast, it's never only about the topic that you're listening to. You eventually learn to know those people. And learning to know those people is at least half the experience inside of a podcast. There are many programs that I listen to now that there's one that I'll share right now. It's there's a program with a former fighter pilot. His name is C.W. Lemoyne, but his fighter pilot handle is his call sign was Mover, and the reasons why he's called Mover is also very interesting. But anyway, the reason, not only, wow, fighter pilot, you got to be kidding me, I get to watch and listen to a fighter pilot talk. Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Not only is he a very prolific author, yes, but recently he started a series of small helicopter training processes that he stuck a camera in and then puts a little back end talk of what he thought about his experience was. And so I have no intention of being a helicopter pilot. I'm not going to be a fighter pilot. I'm too old. But look at the perspective that's being dished out, and I am listening to every single minute of it.
Yeah.
That's podcasting.
That's I mean, you distill it down so nicely for us. I mean, and I think there's a lot of synergies there with just, you know about marketing and business and all that other stuff. This all fits in nicely. This is where, your niche, but then you have to be interesting in that niche, and you have to be willing to talk about it, and you have to be willing to share and throw a camera in the back of a helicopter and, stick your face in front of a screen, that kind of thing. So
yeah.
I think
even in podcasting, while especially this year, COVID has taught all of us that, yes, we can get in front of a camera. You have to remember that podcasting also continues to avail you the opportunity to not be on camera. There is a large segment of podcasters that have absolutely no interest in doing what you and I are doing right now, like
Correct.
At all.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of reasons for that, but the fact is that if you want to be cameraless and no face, you can do that in podcasting too.
Yeah.
Being able to carry through what is kind of this anonymous cone of experience where you deliver information and maybe people don't actually know who you are. If you don't have a particularly interesting sounding voice, or maybe people just don't hear you talk a lot, but you've got this wonderful program that's out on the internet.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. That's a good point, because I think about it through my lens, and we've really been a lot about the video side of it, but you make a really valid point. If the video thing's not your thing, podcasting still checks that box, and I love that. And like I said, that you're leaving that legacy, not only just legacy, but maybe even as simple as just, some tidbits about you and your business that people can go back to and take in whenever they want.
Yeah, the legacy thing, and we'll start hitting on our specific bullet points here. The first thing is that you are leaving a legacy inside of podcasting. I can go and listen to stuff that's over 10 years old right now, stuff that I originally released. And I have the master files of things longer. I have all of my master files from day one of podcasting. They've either lived on a different server or have been evicted off of a place because of too much traffic or whatever else. And so it absolutely leaves a legacy, so that, when my daughter becomes interested, right now she's 17, and she's not very interested not only in her dad, but what dad thinks and says.
At 17, shocking.
Yeah, but eventually when she does, she'll be able to listen to me when I was 34 years old and on, talk about whatever it is I'm talking about. There are many aspects of my family life and, frankly, her life that are shared inside of my podcasting. And it's not because I want to make her look like a fool. It's because she and her mom and, my life are a big piece of my life.
Sure.
And I think that there is definitive value to having a digital line inside of podcasting, where if you don't want to share things that are personal, I don't have any problem with that. If it is really just about delivering skill sets, then I totally get it. But there is this, I don't know quite what to call it, an intangible factor, where when you can drape over the existing pieces of your life and what you have experienced, and how things are going for you, and how you are able to use those experiences to try and govern and overcome hurdles, or maybe even fail to hurdles. There's something endearing about that. And I would always tell people to have some aspect of something personalized inside of your program, because it instantly helps. For the example is, I don't know a lot of the people that are here inside the chat room with us today, but I know that they'll at least remember me. And that gets back to the concept of being interesting, which is an incredibly valuable piece of any podcasting. You don't have to be the rocket scientist teaching other rocket scientists to be a great podcaster. You have to be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fantastic point, Mike, that it is, and I think where you talked about the, bringing your personality, bringing maybe something personal into these things, though, does give you that experience of being a little bit more interesting. I can look at some of the things that I've done and said over the years, but a lot of it comes down to some of the relationships. I love the fact that I get to bring my son and my wife into the mix, even just in an intro situation. And, so yeah, I feel like people have gotten to know me, even though maybe I've never met them face to face. I've got some folks that are in the chat right now that some of them I've never met face to face, but I would call them friends, and that is a really cool experience, just from being able to share my story, share the things that I know, and go from there. So, Mike, what about, you mentioned skill set and stuff like that. How can you foster that inside of a podcast? What are the benefits of all this sharing that we're doing?
I think the easiest sample to draw on are the customers that I've had in the past. The three most recent customers that I've got in regard to podcasting: one is a 911 police dispatcher, another is a licensed counselor that is using her love and lifelong relationship with animal training to share the stories and conversations that she has with people. And then the third one, he's actually got two podcasts. He's a pediatric sports medicine practitioner, and one program is specifically for the rocket scientists / sports pediatricians.
Yeah.
The other one is for humankind, like you and I, and
yeah,
the coaches and the parents and the actual the young athletes. And that right there is your microcosm of skill set being presented. You and I and everybody that's listening that is not a 911 dispatcher will never be able to give us the perspective and the how things work and the processes and the mechanics of what happens for a police 911 dispatcher. I'm not going to be a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm not going to go and raise championship golden retrievers. And so I can't give you the perspective that Allison brings to the Animal Academy podcast.
Yeah.
I am not going to be a sports pediatrician. Deciding that I was not going to be a doctor long ago happened. I can interpret it all with my hands because I'm a former certified sign language interpreter for the deaf.
Uh-huh.
But what I can't do is I am not going to be a doctor. But I can learn all about the things that they talk about and absorb the information from the people that have a podcast that have a specific skill set that they are now sharing with other people, whether it's people of their own ilk, like Dr. Mark's pediatric sports medicine podcast, where it's doctor's perspective to
Yeah.
a bunch of doctors, and they're eating it up like soup with a biscuit.
Sure.
Or just something more general, where who doesn't want to know why doing specific things inside of a 911 call is valuable for not only your life but the others around you and the people you love. That's why Digitally Dispatch, the podcast with Lisa Moore, is way more about education. It's also that's a grain of everything that I've done inside of Two Guys Talking, whether it be my own content or someone else's. There's always at least a grain of education in it, so that when you finish the podcast, you'll have always absorbed at least several light bulb moments. If you are not conveying light bulb moments inside of your podcast or your live programming, my opinion, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
Everybody knows lots of stuff, but if you're not giving something that is probably a good solid value to what you're doing, then I don't think you're doing it right. And there needs to be something else added into your podcast that allows people to get something from your perspective inside of whatever you're talking about. I think the best sample there I can give you is we've just finished up the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast, which tracks each and every episode of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC and Hulu streaming. And that program has been a phenomenal run. That program itself is phenomenal. The storytelling, the acting that's showcased in it, the role models that are given to, in particular, young women inside of that program, it has been a boon for the entertainment industry, not because there's all kind of virtue signaling and messaging that's been laced throughout it, because there hasn't been. It's been very, very straightforward and a natural layout of content that is incredibly satisfying, that I get to talk about every week with my co-host Nick inside of that program, during which we not only talk about what we're seeing inside of the show, but how and why the mechanisms inside of the show are compelling you to watch it and want to watch more. That's the value of that show. It's not that, okay, at minute 18, we're going to talk about what happened inside of that minute. That's not what we do inside that program at all. What we're doing is we're breaking down what happens inside of that and then telling people how we feel about seeing it and why it works or why it doesn't work.
Sure.
That's the difference between, again, you can go anywhere and learn what happened inside that episode, but that's not what we're doing.
Yeah.
You're coming for an educational breakdown of each and every episode of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and checkbox, you got it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great story, a great way to explain how this thing works. So Mike, let's back up from that just a little bit though, because I think some people might sit and go, okay, but I've got to create that aha moment and or that kind of thing. And it's just not me. I'm not that interesting or whatever. But I think, in fact, you've probably already shared some examples. I think that there's an opportunity for everybody. We all have our own unique perspective. Nobody is Aaron. Nobody else is Mike. And therefore, there's things that I know that nobody else knows, and not for any other reason than I'm me and you're not. So how does that, have you had people that came to you and you kind of had to talk them into sharing who they are?
The podcasting story that anyone can share is a story that is all their own. And with a tiny little bit of creative guidance and fostering, just about everybody has something about their life or a story that they can tell that can become the centerpiece of a podcast. Does that mean that it can continue forever for 17 years and be awesome? No. There are a limit to stories
Yeah.
that people can conjure and come up with. It's why the interview podcast has become so awesome, because frankly, you'll never run out of people to interview if you can just go find some more people to interview, right?
Sure.
Though that does get old also. It's, there was a gentleman that hit me up recently about coming on, and he's recently written a book about a gentleman named Charlie Gito. And for those that are outside the St. Louis area, you may not know Charlie Gito, but he's an incredibly prolific restaurateur in the local area who unfortunately died recently. I think it was February or March this year. And the gentleman that contacted me he's a sage friend of mine. I've known him for 20 plus years. And he contacted me and said, "So how do I get on your show to get interviewed about my book that I've written about Charlie Gito?" And I thought to myself, okay, so let's start the roundabout of how do I bring on a dude that wants to talk about a restaurateur that's prolific to St. Louis? How do we figure that one? Now, I figured out a couple, believe it or not, but it's roundabout. It's very roundabout. There's a new video audio podcast that I'm going to be starting called Charger Forward. Charger Forward is the adventures of my family and I inside of our new Starship, which is our 2018 Dodge Charger that we got into last year. And it's never been more appropriate that it's almost a shuttlecraft, and that we go all over the place. We just don't get out much right now because
Yeah, exactly.
global pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So interviewing this guy about his book, because we do go to restaurants and we share what we think about restaurants, and we take pictures and talk about the cheeseburgers we see and the steaks that we eat. We do all that. So there's your in. So can I go and have everybody have a sliver of a podcast somewhere? I think that there's a way to build that. You have to have some very robust resources though, because most people don't also have this automotive vlog thing that I can then twist into something that could accommodate that. The sample would be, if I only had the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast, how do I bring on the restaurateur of Charlie Gito, a book being written about a restaurateur named Charlie Gito? Well,
Yeah.
there
That's
are
a hard
ways to
fit.
figure that, but it starts to get into that weird part where people wouldn't really understand why I'm interviewing this guy that wrote a book about a restaurateur in St. Louis inside of my Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast.
Yeah. It makes sense that, you've got to have that ability to, like I said, have more than just, where that fits. That's a good point about the story and understanding, what it is you're going to share and with who. I think
One of
like
the most interesting skill set propositions that I gave somebody, what I do believe is, I believe everybody has a podcast regardless of what their profession is. Specifically in regard to professions, this was a question you asked me before we started that we should probably share with people too,
Yeah.
is why do you come to someone like Mike Wilkerson for your podcast? And it's very straightforward, especially after having done now a year of contemplating and building in my Charger Forward podcast. I know a lot of things about cars. I know how they work, and I know what I think looks good, and I know what I think impresses, and I love all of that. What Mike Wilkerson doesn't know is anything about fixing cars. Like, nothing.
Yeah.
Like, I know how to get in, and I know how to drive a really great looking car. That's kind of my skill set.
Sure.
and how to document it. All check boxes all over the place. But when it comes to anything else, like, I don't know, changing oil, I'm not the guy.
Yeah.
I am not the guy. I have a variety of things in my shop at home that would probably allow me to do it. And I could go on the internet and find out how to change the oil on a 2018 Dodge Charger RT. Sure. But I'd rather pay someone $70 to get it done and leave in 25 minutes. And I hate boiling all of my sample down to exactly that, but that's why you want Mike Wilkerson.
Yeah.
Because you got stuff you got to go do.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And so I'm glad to teach everybody anything that I can, in particular when it's on an hourly rate. But the bottom line is, would you like it done for you? Because we'll have it done in about 13 minutes.
Yeah.
Or I can teach you over the course of 5 or 6 hours, and then you can try and figure it out. And when you don't want to do it anymore, or you your effort fails and you fall on your face and you feel bad, then you can come to me.
Sure.
And so I always want to offer that to people on the front end, because it's why I don't change my own oil. It's not a very long process. The instructions that I've seen on how to do it on other vehicles, it doesn't look all that involved. I just don't want to do it. I want to sit in a chair for 20 minutes and leave.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes perfect sense. I mean, honestly, it's where where I fit into this whole thing. Like I said, this whole Small Business Saturdays was just about exploring topics that small businesses are there. And I came to your studio one day to try something new, and you gave me that light bulb moment of like, there's a little bit more than just a capture here. It can be a podcast. Has it been prolific? No, but it definitely leaves a bit of, like you said, it leaves that legacy. It allows me to be an expert in certain areas and say, hey, if you've got questions about this, you can go check this out here. And
for everyone that's listening, Aaron is experiencing a concept that many podcasters, especially ones that have an incredibly prolific library, often do not give themselves nearly enough credit that they should. And the reason is because while Aaron is talking very quaintly about his podcast, what I always tell people about Aaron's podcast, Small Business Saturdays, is that I don't know another podcast where you can go and get the scope of subjects that are discussed, where you can then get the meaty nuggets that you need to at least get started with whatever is being talked about.
Yeah.
And very often it takes someone like me or someone that's been able to step outside the cone of, I'm helping this guy make this program with a microphone and get this all done. You have to be able to step outside and look at the value proposition that a podcast can or will deliver. And without question, your podcast is literally a series of feathers in Aaron Montgomery's cap, so that regardless of who or what entity might go and look to do business, Aaron literally has this deck of cards that he can pull out at any time, send to people 24/7, 365, and say, start here and contact me when you've got questions. And it instantly is a tool for him. That's the value that podcasting brings to any professional that does anything at all. You don't have to do something that's internet based. As long as you can capture what you're doing, even if it's, it was a cabinet maker that came to me and said, dude, I'm a 20 plus year cabinet maker. How is a podcast going to benefit me inside of a podcast?
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I go, let me get this straight. How long have you been a cabinet maker? He says 27 years. 27 years doing anything is a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
And in particular, inside of a trade like that. And while it should definitely be something video so that people can understand the craftsmanship that's involved in crafting custom cabinetry across 27 years of experience, I mean, like, I would go and watch that, not because I want to be the master woodmaker, but because it's steeped in legacy. The tools that guy is using, the stories that he's heard from either his parents or the other people that he's worked with. Who doesn't want to hear all that as part of a cabinet maker podcast process where you get to learn all kinds of stuff? There's a gentleman named his code name inside of YouTube is Wrangler Star. And Mr. Wrangler Star is a gentleman that practices what is called modern homesteading. He's out in Oregon, and he used to be a professional firefighter. And he and his family decided to uproot themselves from a city and just move to the middle of nowhere and begin building. And what he's crafted out of this legacy of just building this stuff on his own homestead is amazing. And it's not because I want to go do that. It's, again, it gets back to that same helicopter style concept where I have no interest in flying a helicopter, but here I am watching this ex-fighter jet pilot. I'm watching him learn how to fly a helicopter. What's the same thing with this Wrangler Star guy where he's talking about how to sharpen an axe or how to outfit your toolbox or how to segment toolboxes so that you're not carrying every tool you have around inside of the Mike Wilkerson sized toolbox where he yanks his shoulder out of socket every time he picks it up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I need that. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that even in the most remotest of experience sets, there's something inside of your experience set and your storytelling that you can convey that can be a podcast.
That's fantastic. I mean, that really gives us that essence of where podcasts come from and what makes them interesting, and you're relating it to us in a way that we can understand that we all have that ability, we all have that there. It just is a matter of cultivating it, and in a lot of cases it's a matter of finding the right partners to help you do that. The podcast matrix, for example. Speaking of that, Mike, I want to we had a quick question from audience from Janessa.
Yeah,
said,
away.
yeah, who is the pediatric sports podcaster Mike mentioned?
Sure, that's Dr. Mark Halstead.
Okay, and where can she find that information about him?
Sure, it's pediatricsportsmedicinepodcast.com.
Perfect. There you go. Easy.
You can also, for the humankind, for the rest of us here in the room,
yeah,
all
exactly.
of us that are here, the rest of us can go over to healthyyoungathlete.podcast.com.
Oh, sweet. Okay, cool. Well, there you go, Janessa. Check that out. And all right, Mike. So let's turn the corner just a hair here, because I want to get into a little bit kind of nuts and bolts, not fully nuts and bolts, but I guess what people are going to probably be asking about, okay, so we get legacy, we get to kind of show off a skill set, we get to have this, a little bit of a calling card, but from a business perspective, where's the value here? Can we monetize these things? What's the hook, so to speak?
Monetizing a podcast, depending on whom you're talking to, is incredibly easy.
Yeah, right.
Let me be straight. It is not easy. It has become more prolific as the number of podcasters has increased, but that's just math. There are many people that have a sponsored podcast, but traditionally the sponsors that are gotten are not unlike the original sponsors that I got, where it's either an existing relationship and they want to try and foster along the program, or they want to glom on and take advantage of some of the traffic that we had. That was the original case with me and Sprint. The finding the value to being able to at least get even on your podcast it's not unattainable. It also is just hard work. And if you've never done it and you're not working with anybody that's never done it, it is not easy.
Yeah.
There are many ways to make money with your podcast, but there are only a few ways to make it profitable. And I think what a lot of people should also remember is that making your podcast monetizable or profitable should not be the only reason that you're doing podcasting.
Yep.
And if that is the sole reason that you're doing it, I've got really, really bad news. This is not the thing to get into to go and instantly make money. Now, podcasting is and will probably always be a very long haul, because there is a trust proposition that has to be built into podcasting. Even if you've got thousands of customers and you decide to generate a podcast, that doesn't then mean you have thousands of listeners to your podcast. It means that you have thousands of potential listeners to your podcast. And so you've still got to be able to make something that can be at least another semblance of a profitable platform for people to pay money into. And that's a big deal. I don't think a lot of people take that to heart strongly enough, is that just because you make something, we've talked about it a little bit, Aaron, just because you make something, in particular on the internet, does not then mean everybody's going to come and buy it. It has never worked that way. Anything that you see on the internet that says that it is that way, I would instantly take the red pill on, because it doesn't traditionally work that way.
Yeah. So if you're not looking at this from a profit perspective, which again, I completely agree with you. That's never the way you should go into this. You and I, before we got on here live, we're talking about there's not going to probably be another Joe Rogan, for example, where you're kind of fall into the.
Let's use Joe Rogan as
a sure.
For those that aren't familiar with Joe Rogan, and it does happen, believe it or not, Joe Rogan is a current and former stand-up comedian who has been in a variety of different media outlets and television programs, and he is a prolific MMA fighter, commentator. He has this robust Swiss Army knife of life that he has been able to bring and cultivate inside of what he is calling his podcast. And up until recently, he had it on YouTube and available through the entire array of directories and listings for podcasts as the Joe Rogan Experience. Recently, a couple of months ago now, he scored a multi-million-dollar deal with Spotify, and it's huge. It's unlike a deal you and I will probably see in our lives again.
Yeah.
And what is very frustrating is, especially as a professional podcaster, and I call people that have been podcasting as long as I have an OG podcaster, because I do remember when there were only thousands of podcasts available on iTunes. And what a lot of people will come to me and they'll go, you know, man, I want to be the next Joe Rogan. And what I always try and encourage people to understand is that while you may even be as funny as what a lot of people consider Joe Rogan is, you may even talk about MMA fighting. You may even have had a prolific stand-up career. You are not Joe Rogan. You are not the culmination of Joe Rogan's now almost 25 years of experience of life that has sprouted little buds into these other pieces and avenues of life that he has been able to prolifically exploit and grow into what is now this juggernaut.
Yeah.
That's going to exist, which will actually exist. It'll exist inside the podcast realm because it's the Joe Rogan podcast, but it's specifically outside the realm because it's going to be available eventually only on Spotify. So saying that you want to be the next Joe Rogan, does that mean that you want to make $1 million or millions of dollars doing what you're doing? That's fine. And I will help you build the seeds for it. But just understand that you are not 3.6 years away from being a multimillionaire doing podcasts. There needs to be an auxiliary reason for you to do podcasts, like finding leads or establishing the ability for people to understand that you are the source of information for whatever you're the source of information for.
Sure.
And when you start to consider it that way, you start to get into what I consider the golden area that Aaron is in, where he realizes that the podcast is a piece of the toolbox that helps you grow and expand your business, in particular while you sleep. 24/7, 365. Everybody has access to Aaron's knowledge, learning, and previous experiences via his podcast. Who doesn't want that as a tool to help sell yourself and your services?
Sure.
That's what you need to try and have as the golden centerpiece target of generating a podcast first. If it's not just, I want to have a podcast because I want to have a podcast, that's fine too. I don't mind any of that. What I always require, and what I love to have people working on, is having an educational aspect inside of even the podcast. Well, I just want to sit and talk in front of a microphone for an hour. That's cool, but what's the educational point? Because then I'm in. If you just want to sit there and blather in front of a microphone, I'm probably not your guy.
Yeah. No, it's a really important point, because it just doesn't, like I said, you know, even somebody like a Joe Rogan, I mean, there's still an educational piece to all of that. I can't think of any situation where somebody has just sat and blathered in front of a microphone and that turned into anything of any value to anybody. I mean,
one of my favorite samples, and I'm a regular listener depending on who is on. I saw a name that was Steve Aoki. And for those that don't know Steve Aoki, I didn't know him either. Steve Aoki is a prolific DJ. So he gets in front of crowds of 60,000 or so and plays music. Okay, I'm not that crowd. But I sure as hell am interested in listening to how he's cultivated that crowd, but also the now 4 and 5 other business stair steps that he's made inside of his existence. Sign me up for that.
Yeah.
Inside of that Steve Aoki podcast that Joe Rogan had on, it's one of the best ones I've ever heard. And it's because they talk about the dynamics of generating business and the failures that instantly happen when you are not dedicated, when you are not 100% committed to what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of, again, lead into that whole scenario of finding that golden, like you said, I like the golden circle, what a podcasting really does for a business. Yeah, my example is my podcasting and the things that I've done haven't been this massive profitable thing, but it's led into things that, where it's an experience, it's an opportunity to go speak at a trade show, it's a opportunity to become a writer for a magazine, or because the fact that I was able to share and enough people thought that it was good information that they could help and their audience would be interested in, and it led to other things. So like I said, lead generation, um, but I think just, you mentioned this early on, Mike, just that trust that you're able to build with people, because people do get to know you. People know that I've got a son, Lewis, and my wife, Kylene, and my older son, Keegan, who lives in Arizona, who has autism. They know that about me because of me sharing these things. It has nothing to do with small business, but that's Aaron. And so I'm sharing Aaron too. And I think that's interesting for me to kind of realize, how that then takes the podcast and makes it a whole different thing than, oh, I've got to get sponsors, or, I've got to make sure I'm bringing in this many leads. It's something you can't count, I guess, is kind of what becomes the real value.
Well, what I always consider podcasting, especially when it's not the top, I must be making money with my podcast concept. It's kind of it's that authority call where you can say that I have done whatever it is you've done inside of podcasting across however many years or months or episodes or whatever you want to do. You are the authority in whatever you are the authority in.
Mm-hmm.
My having done podcasting for 17 years across a variety of programs makes me an authority inside of podcasting, so that I can come on a program like yours and talk to people from any walk of life about how they might be able to have a podcast. And then I have built this series of services and stair steps so that they can use me or my services to get done whatever they need to across the board in regard to podcasting. What that does is that fosters the value concept of building an auxiliary income to whatever it is you also have, which is, I think, probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of small business, where everybody thinks, okay, so you need to generate your small business, and then one day you'll be able to click the tethers to the big, angry, ugly company that is your current existing boss, and fly free, little bird. It doesn't always have to be like that. Make whatever is inside of the cone of your podcasting and augment to your existing income so that you can do more things. And eventually, if you can build your, in my case, a podcast network business into this thing that can support and do things, and then also be able to leave wherever you were originally, then fine, do that too. But don't get crazy. Don't go, I need to just forget everything else that's around my life and only focus on podcasting. You are going to lose big if you do that.
Yeah. The concept of the augmentation of having those. Well, you're building a wider foundation, really, a sturdier foundation, where you have different things. You're sharing information here. You've got your business. A lot of the folks that are listening in right now are decorators. They're creative, and Janessa, for example, I can see her talking about the cheer industry, and she's got her own perspective, and I can see that being a huge thing that people would want to listen to.
Without question. And my daughter, having been in competitive cheer for, I think she was in for 7 or 8 years, the people that are inside of that cone are instant potential interviewees. In particular, the athletes themselves. They're I don't know another industry like competitive cheer. I mean, like, seriously, I don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe like cake competitions where it's that passionate and that niche,
Yeah,
where it's got that niche. But that's a phenomenally interesting podcast that could happen across a variety of different aspects inside a competitive cheer for sure.
Sure, for sure. Genesis says about the DJ. He is a very cool DJ. Steve Aoki, I think is what you said, Mike. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
And
Okay.
I think, Aaron, if we're going to include a series of show notes for this episode, we should definitely eventually link off to that Steve Aoki episode of the Joe Rogan podcast.
Okay.
I think he's now actually been on several times, but I'm serious. Just out of the blue, I'm like, who the hell is Steve Aoki? Click. Because there are many of the Joe Rogan podcasts. This is another interesting thing about podcasting. I would consider myself a listener of Joe Rogan, but I don't like all the Joe Rogan podcasts. There are some where I think they're solely offensive and I don't want to listen to them. But then there are others where I am glued to people I would have never thought I would sit and listen to. Steve Aoki is a perfect sample. And I think that other people can have that akin experience. It's just a matter of who you are and how you deliver your podcast platform. So that while we talked about the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast, what if Steve Aoki showed up in our Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast? Kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
But if you show up on something like the Joe Rogan Experience, he's made it where it's kind of this variety show. For those of you that don't remember or weren't alive for variety shows, it's where there would just be this program and people would appear. And then you would either enjoy them or not enjoy them, and then you'd tune in next week. That's what Joe Rogan has made.
Yeah.
I hate to put it into simple terms like that, but that's what he's made. He brings on people that he thinks he's going to have an interesting conversation with or are educationally topical to bring knowledge to him that he had not had before, and he read something about them or heard a conversation that they had with somebody else on another podcast, and now he wants to talk to them.
Sure.
That's the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yeah.
And it's great to want to conjure that yourself. You just have to understand that you do not have any of that nucleus that Joe Rogan built. And so just remember that. Try and keep that I want to be the next Joe Rogan thing in check, because you cannot be the next Joe Rogan. You've got to be you.
Yeah. But yeah, you can be the next Aaron Montgomery. You can be the next Mike Wilkerson.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to be you. And I think, like you said, just keep that in check. Cause yeah, make your aspirations what it is for you. If you want to make $1 million with a podcast, okay, but you got to do it a totally different way than Joe Rogan did, so.
And that is changing. Something that I will absolutely agree to is that, especially in the time of COVID, where everybody is now they're interested in learning how to record remotely. Of course you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Where were you guys 18 months ago when I've got podcasters who've tried to get guests forever, and you say the word Zoom and they go, what do you mean Zoom? Like an airplane? What do you mean Zoom? And now everybody's using it and knows what it is. So the concept of priority sets is also a very interesting play inside of podcasting, without question.
Yeah. Well, so Mike, let's talk about the capture. You mentioned can be done anywhere on the planet potentially. Yes, no. What is? Talk to us a little bit about kind of podcasting how does it actually work?
Sure.
What's it look like?
For those out there that are going, man, I don't have the tolerance or the patience to look for a microphone and get into an audio interface, and I don't have the money for a laptop, and you can talk like that and doubt yourself into nauseum, literally.
Yeah.
Forever. I know a podcaster that now for 11 years has had the equipment sitting in his basement and he hasn't touched it. And it is such a sad sample because he spent probably $600-$700 on the equipment, and he bought everything. He bought a mini studio of equipment to get it done, and it has never done it. And that's so frustrating, because for those that think you got to have, this gorgeous microphone, and, a little behind the scenes here, having a gorgeous microphone is great, but it's not you must have. You do
Sure.
not have to have the best technology. You don't have to spend oodles of money. What you have to have is some dedication and a viable story. The best sample I always tell people about is when my dad originally started podcasting. He started podcasting into something called an iRiver. And for those of you that don't know what an iRiver is, the iRiver is a mobile recorder that is about the size of a matchbox. And literally the on switch, you smash at the top of it and then it starts recording. And then when you're done, you smash the top of it and it stops recording. That's what my dad used to record his very first 12 or so podcasts of Fast Freddy's Castle of Common Sense. And I consider it gold.
Sure.
Is it the best podcasting quality ever? Absolutely not. But did he get the job done and get his feet wet so that he could be comfortable and sit down and talk about the things that we'll be able to enjoy forever because they're now a recorded document? Absolutely. And so it is that simple. You just have to have a concept, an idea, and then a mechanism. The iRiver back when it was new, I think cost $70. So that wasn't very expensive. There are now $70 audio recorders that are much more robust and the fidelity is incredibly good. What a lot of people don't know is you can also record a podcast, though I don't recommend it, on your smartphone. Does that mean that you should be doing that and utilizing that as your main platform for podcasting on an ongoing basis? I will never want to tell people that because I think that there are better options that cost less money and are far more reliable than trying to use your cell phone as a dedicated podcast capture platform. But it can be done.
Yeah.
And it can be done for very little in the way of money. It's just a matter of setting up the plan or getting with someone like me or like Aaron, who has done a lot of this that can get you those building blocks to establish that foundation to then build on.
Yeah. So, Mike, let's talk about, though, the next step of it. And again, when you and I started talking, I had already been podcasting. We'll use that as a very loose term at that point. I was using a program called Blog Talk Radio, and it served its purpose, but we were calling in on cell phones, and some of my old stuff, boy, I just cringe at the sound quality. I mean, again, sound quality has never been what our program's always been about, but we wanted to step it up a little bit. But so I knew about what needed to happen. I knew how to get my RSS feed out there, and I podcast and to Apple and blah blah blah. But you mentioned this earlier. You could change your own oil, but you don't necessarily want to. And I got to that point where I was putting in so much time and effort into something that wasn't actually making me a lot of direct money that when it came time for Small Business Saturdays to become a podcast, fortunately you had, I think at that time it was relatively new. The Podcaster Matrix was relatively new, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. You had this opportunity for me to just kind of go, Mike, help me out here. And that was the cool part. So talk to me a little bit about how that service works, where, what does somebody need to basically be able to hand off to the Podcaster Matrix?
Sure. We're going to go into the foundations of what getting your podcast out there actually means. Because sure. I think a lot of people think that it's very simple where you sit in front of a microphone and magic happens.
Yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't. The magic does not happen like that. Regardless of what program you're using or what program will tell you that is how it works, it doesn't. It doesn't work like that. There are a variety of different pieces, parts. And for those of you that are taking notes, now is a great time to take notes. The first part we're going to start with is the capture. The capture is the actual capturing of the program, whether it's just you sitting in front of a small iRiver and capturing the podcast, whatever the episode's going to be, whether it be about, let's see, what did Dad talk about? He talked about not getting into credit card debt. He talked about not being a shopping dumbass. He's talked about so many great things that are just gold. And so you got to capture whatever it is you're going to talk about. And to do that, you need something that's called the skeleton, or at least I think you need something that's called the skeleton. And the skeleton doesn't have to be every single word written out, but it does need to be an outline of what it is you're trying to convey inside of your episode. Does it mean you have to sit and look at the bullet points and then talk to people as you go? No, it doesn't. Though if you do, don't feel ashamed.
Yeah.
The whole thing about bullet points is that they help guide you. And not everybody can remember a series of bullet points, even me after 17 years. I'm really good at coming up with intros completely out of thin air. But when it comes to a bullet point list of things, in particular inside of something that's got 20, 30 something things like the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast, I'm never going to remember all those things. And so I got to document them and put them down
Sure.
someplace. So the capture, which is a big deal, needs to be quality, but most importantly, there needs to be at least one light bulb moment in whatever you're conveying.
Okay.
The second point is the edit. For those of you that say, well, I don't want to edit my program, I just want it to be natural, or I want it to be genuine. I totally agree with that. But something that you'll note from Aaron and my discussion here is that because I'm able to talk to Aaron without using a lot of ums, ers, us, and filler words, if you go back and listen to this episode, guess what Aaron is also not doing? And so it is a magnetic process. It is not an accidental thing. The problem is that it's something that a lot of people just can't get over. They can't undo the or bug that's inside of their brain. And so that's why you have editors. Editors are going to help take all of the problem pieces, or at least as many of them as possible, out of your podcast experience and give your listeners something that's much easier to listen to. What that also means is that if something is set in a time, one of Aaron's episodes is a really great sample where it was conveyed during Christmas time. And that's fine. It's conveyed during Christmas time. And he even talks about going down to a local city named St. Charles, right down the way from us on the highway,
Yep.
and doing some activities there. And that's all awesome. Is it germane to the episode that's going to be released that talks about whatever the topic was, though? Probably not.
Yep.
And so that in an edit process can be excised so that you get to the meat of the episode and your listeners are satisfied. Follow me on the edit?
Yep. Definitely.
Okay. What the edit also does is it builds something that can then become the options and the nucleus for speaking engagements, which is, I won't say all, but many of us are appreciative of speaking engagement opportunities where you can go in front of people, not unlike what we're doing now with Aaron's audience and everything else, and speak in front of people to help people understand not only what's important about whatever we're talking about, but perhaps you over there on the side on the chat window, perhaps you want to be my customer. Okay?
Yep.
So that's the other reason why editing is huge. The third piece is the publishing. So you need to be able to make a library of everything that you do podcasting wise from the time it's captured to the time it's done. That means including the show notes and the links listings and everything else that's included inside of your podcast. If you're not doing that now, it doesn't mean that you can't. It just means that you've got to acquire another skill set. And across the skill sets that we've talked about, if you've been keeping track so far, that's 4 different skill sets already just to get to the part where you're publishing the podcast.
Yeah.
Now you've got to promote the podcast. Promoting a podcast is a big deal, and it's also a giant question mark. For those of you that are in the audience that are listening or listening to this in a recorded mode, you'll go, well, what's the magic elixir for promoting my podcast, Mr. Podcaster Wizard? And there is no magic elixir bullet button thing that you can push. I hate to be the one to tell you, but you have to go and find the audiences that are out there and then interact with them. I know it sounds amazingly strange, but you actually have to interact with the audiences you make. And if you don't, expecting them to just come when you make things on the internet, well, we've kind of already talked about that, haven't we?
It does not work that way for sure.
It doesn't work that way. Aaron is the decorators that are listening right now. You all are steeped inside of a podcast called Two Regular Guys, and it's 2 regular guys that happen to be decorators that hit the convention circuit for decorators. There aren't a whole lot of those.
Nope. Regulars being used very loosely there.
Yeah. And so you have found yourself into a niche. Yeah, a niche. You have found yourself into this cone of existence that is incredibly rare, but it exists and it's vibrant, and you get to revel in it every time that you publish something. And you guys revel in the part that you revel in. You hate all of the work that I've just told you about. So why not let me do it?
Exactly.
And that is the Podcaster Matrix. The Podcaster Matrix is where Beyond my cone of services that I've always provided inside of Two Guys Talking, the Podcaster Matrix allows me to open up the front end of it a little bit. Where do I require everything on the Podcaster Matrix to be educational? No, I don't. I do want there to be value, however. So the Time to Talk Jackassery program, I don't think you're ever going to see that on the Podcaster Matrix, because there's a piece of integrity that I have that's more valuable than me getting X amount of dollars a month from your Jackassery podcast. Sorry.
Yeah, fortunately, we're dealing with small business owners here that that it's about the education, because that's really, honestly, when we look at this from a small business perspective, in the world we live in today, as business owners that are also required to then be our own salespeople and our own marketing department and all this other stuff, really the people that are successful are the ones that are just out there educating their potential customers.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where the podcasting thing fits so nicely, is that it's that tool that allows you to educate while you're asleep, like you said, 24/7. So Mike, what
the thing is, I don't know another one like it. I don't know another business model that you can go to across any piece of media right now and get the value that you do. And in particular, you and I ironically happen to be live streaming. And I know a lot of people that go, I enjoy live streaming. I think it's more valuable than podcasting. And I think if maybe you have a live audience that's several hundred people every single time you come on, maybe I would agree with you. But when I know a podcast will generate 1,000 or so unique listens monthly, when it hasn't been touched or talked about in months, I don't know that your live broadcasting anything has the power that anything podcasting does.
Yeah.
And that's not to downplay live streaming, because we're doing it right now, Aaron.
Sure.
But you and I both know that this is the prelude to it becoming a recorded podcast episode that will be far more prolific than anything that's happening right now.
Correct. I mean, our Two Regular Guys podcast is exactly the perfect example of that. We've been doing that as a live, quote unquote, live broadcast since, at least 4 years now, I guess, is what it's been for that. And before that, we were still kind of, quote unquote, live capturing via Blog Talk Radio. And even to this day, where the live part has grown, the numbers continue to grow at the same rate. So probably still approximately 80% of all of the listens that we get on Two Regular Guys is still the podcast. Even though, the focus has been kind of the live broadcast for 4 years now. But like you said, it's that building, the people that subscribe, and they're driving in their car, not as much anymore, but they're whatever, they're printing t-shirts and they have our program on. We get that comment all of the time. And it's amazing to me. I mean, honestly, it really shocks me.
Yeah,
but
being able to lean into that wheelhouse of how people are interacting and finding you is incredibly valuable inside of podcasting. Identifying it is one of the hardest things also, because you probably have a line of how you think people are going to take in your program. And very often, even something for as straightforward as what you think television and feature film review would be, it's almost something always decidedly different.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, Mike. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What did we miss? Anything you want to expand on? But then also make sure you let people know where to find you. I've got podcastermatrix.com on the banner at the bottom here, but for the podcast folks, give us a little bit more.
Sure. Podcastermatrix.com is where you want to go to get all of the listing of services. The pricing is all very transparent and showcased there. What we're also offering for every customer now is the first 2 minutes of your podcast, regardless of what level you take in and start participating in. The first 2 minutes of your program get edited for free. And while 2 minutes doesn't sound like much, what you have to remember is that if your listener is in after 2 minutes, they're likely to be in for the rest of your program. So putting on that polish on the front end of your podcast now happens for free. All you got to do is do business with the Podcaster Matrix at any level. So that's a piece of that's a huge piece of business deal for any podcaster, because it's something else that you don't have to do.
Yeah, that's huge.
Of the things that we've maybe missed on, I think maybe voiceover is something I'd like to also just talk about quick.
Sure.
There's something that my dad concepted back in 1973 that back then he called the Voice Farm. And the Voice Farm is this cool place where you can go and you can learn to become a voiceover artist. Well, fast forward now to it was 2014 when we started it, and now into 2020 where there is the Voice Farm. So those of you that have ever wanted to or think you've got a voice, or someone has always said, boy, you've got a voice for radio, that's amazing. Well, guess what? You can go and give it a shot right now over at voicefarmers.com. That is a very significant piece of the podcast business that I have because, frankly, while your intros, especially Aaron's, are incredibly endearing because it's his family and him, something that really does add panache to a podcast is when the intro and the outro and to push the brakes are not you, where it's somebody else. Or perhaps the commercials that you record inside of your podcast. Wouldn't it be cool if they were somebody else?
Yeah.
So in addition to being able to teach people how to become a voiceover artist, we also convey all of those services with the people that I have cultivated as voiceover artists so that you can get all that done at an incredibly affordable rate. Again, that's over at voicefarmers.com.
Cool. Excellent. That's great. I love that message about, bringing in that different voice that is a, curated voice, I guess would be a way that I would describe it. Somebody that is doing that professionally. It definitely brings a whole new level to the podcast. I love my intro, like you mentioned, but being able to have that, check this out. This is the latest thing happening in our success group or something like that would be huge.
The podcast we're generating right now, it's the review of the cult 80s television show, Friday the 13th, the series. That's not the series of movies with the giant knifey, slashy teens having sex death show. That's not what that is. This show is the Cursed Antiques based program. Friday the 13th, the series. And we're going back episode by episode reviewing it. And the intro and outro for that show is somebody completely different than my co-host and I. And it really does add a flavor that if it wasn't there, it would be sorely missed.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a great service.
Good. Excellent. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time this morning. This has been great. And thanks for all of your help in helping me grow my podcast and whatnot. And I definitely encourage people to get over to thepodcastermatrix.com and check that out. And very affordable services. I don't even notice the charge. So it feels right, Mike. Let's put it that way.
Well, thanks so much for that testimonial, Aaron. Again, the circle of people that I love surrounding myself with are the people that are never afraid to talk about what satisfies them. And it gives me another proud moment to know that you're satisfied along with all of our other customers.
Excellent. All right, Mike, have a great rest of your Saturday, and we will talk to you very soon.
Thanks so much. Have a good day, everybody.
Wonderful. All right. Well, that was fantastic talking to Mike. As you can tell, Mike has a passion for podcasting that, rivals anybody I know. And I love that about him, and he's so willing to share what he knows and his perspective and everything that he brought there. So if you guys have questions about podcasting, make sure you get over to the Podcasters Matrix. Let me know what questions you have, if we want to get into anything else out there for folks before we call it a day. We've had a wonderful about an hour and 15 minutes now. So great time talking to Mike today. Last bit for me, just wanted to remind everybody, our successgroup.com, make sure you're becoming a member over there if you're not a member already for the 5 keys coming up. Also wanted to share with folks the Success Tracker. It's one of my favorite services that we've got over there at oursuccessgroup.com. There it is down there at the bottom, oursuccessgroup.com/ST. And that gives you an opportunity to make a 12-month goal of yours public, get some help reaching it, get that accountability, get that accountability, encouragement, all of that stuff. So make sure you check that out again over at oursuccessgroup.com/ST. And I think that will do it for today, unless you guys have any other questions or comments. And next week here on Small Business Saturdays, I will be hosting Cheryl Kuchek with the Sublimation Summit. And we're going to be talking about what's coming up substrates, sublimation. It's just going to be a great sublimation conversation about, the stuff that her and I are both passionate about in sublimation. So I'm really excited to have Cheryl on with me next week. Mayra, what do we got here? I'm looking for recommendations. What is the best sweatshirt to use for sublimation? Can somebody please share? Mayra, I saw that you had posted that. I don't have a real go-to there. The problem that I find with sublimating a sweatshirt is that there aren't a whole lot of white sweatshirts out there, and that's kind of what you need in the sublimation world. And so if you're not all over decorating that, meaning cut and sew, it does become a little bit of a challenge. I know, I'm trying to think, I believe Vapor might have one. And so really what you're looking for, though, is you're looking for something that has the most polyester content that you can get. And then if it's not going to be an all white, then you might want to make sure that your image is going to be dark, dark lettering and things like that, because the colors in the sweatshirt are going to change the colors of your sublimation transfer. So, sweatshirts to me in a sublimation world are a bit challenging. And so you just got to kind of capture that lightning in the bottle. So if anybody has some specifics of what they've used in the past, please feel free to share that. And Mo said, great info. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Thanks to you as well, Mo. Appreciate you tuning in. And Mayra, I'll do some. Okay, cool. I am looking for white. Excellent. I'll do a little more research this weekend too and see what I can find. Like I said, I've never really sublimated sweatshirts a whole lot. They were always a challenge because nobody really wanted a white sweatshirt. But if you've got that ability to do it on white, we'll see what we can find. So, and you love challenges. You are a rock star. Again, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And if you can make it happen, then let's figure it out. So yeah, I will get, I'm making myself a note right now, and we will see what we can find. But if any of the listeners out there have some suggestions for Mayra, please share with her. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll catch you next week for Small Business Saturdays again with Cheryl Kuchek. And make sure that you're checking out Wednesday. Todd and I will be doing our usual Q&A with TNA, and that will actually be a little bit about getting ourselves set up for the fourth quarter. So even though we're taking your questions, we also have planted a question in there because we want to talk about some things getting ready for the 5 keys. And then also make sure you check out Todd's Tuesdays with Todd right here in the same locations at liveosg.com to catch the YouTube version, or on Facebook at facebook.com/Our Success Group Pro. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody. We will talk to you soon.